Hi, this is Mrs. Parr, and on this episode of Math Up to Par, we are going to be talking about ordering fractions. And we're going to do that without using division to change them to decimals. So we're going to use some benchmark fractions and some comparing fractions strategies to put these fractions in order. So let's talk a little bit about benchmark fractions. Okay, when I think about benchmark fractions, I am thinking about where they relate to 0, 1/2, and 1 whole. So let's look over here at some of our fractions, okay, and we're going to decide where they best fit. So if I'm looking at 3/4 right now, I know that half of 4 is 2. So 2/4 would be about half. 3/4 is greater than a half, so I'm going to put this one under this category. Okay, 1/8. Half of 8 is 9. Nope, it's not. Half of 8 is 4. Just seeing if you were paying attention. So half of 8 is 4. 1 is really far away from 4. So 1/8 is actually going to be less than 1/2. Let's look at 4/9. You can't split 9 in half evenly without having to cut a piece, without having to make it into a further fraction or decimal. So the closest you could get to splitting 9 evenly would be 4 and 5. So this is about 1/2. It's technically less than a half, but it's very close to a half. 8/10, half of 10 is 5. So this is much more than that. So this one's going to be greater than a half. 5/6. 5 is really close to 6. When the numerator is just 1 away from the denominator, you know it's really close, so it's almost whole. So this is greater than a half. 6/12. 6 is exactly half of 12. So 6/12 is about a half, or it is a half. 2/11, you can't split 11 evenly perfectly. So the closest you could get would be 5 and 6, but 2 is a lot less than both of those amounts. So 2/11 would be less than 1/2. And then 3/20, half of 20 is 10. So 3/20 is going to be less than half. Okay, so kind of thinking about fractions in this way and comparing them to 0 or less than a half, about a half, and then greater than a half or closer to 1 whole will help us when we're ordering fractions. So let's say this is my set of fractions, and I'm supposed to order them from least to greatest, okay? So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to first go through each fraction, and I'm going to decide if it's exactly a half, if it's bigger than a half, or if it's more than a half. So automatically, I see that I have 1/2 right here. So I know that's going to kind of go in the middle when I'm sorting them out. I know that half of 8 is 3. Half of 8 is 4. I seem to get that wrong a lot today. Half of 8 is 4. So 3/8 is close to a half, but it is less than a half. So I'm going to write an L above that to remind myself. Over here, 7, I can't split in half evenly. The closest would be 3 and 4, but 6 is very close to 7, so this is almost 1 whole. This is greater than a half. So I'm going to write a G for greater. And then 2/9, half of 9 would be about 4 or 5, so 2 is less than that. So already with this information, I can put several of my fractions in order. I know that I'm going to have 1/2 here in the middle, so I'm going to check that one off. And there's only one fraction left that's bigger than a half. So if I'm ordering them from least to greatest, I can go ahead and put 6/7 over here. So now I'm left with 3/8 and 2/9. Well, I can use my comparing fractions strategies to compare 3/8 and 2/9. So let me come down here and do that. 3/8 and 2/9. So I'm going to use a cross multiplication strategy, and I'm going to say 8 times 2 is 16, and 9 times 3 is 27. And the reason we cross multiply is because we're making them have common denominators so that we can compare them when their parts are the same size. So my denominators, I multiply 8 times 9, and 8 times 9 is 72. So I'm going to put 72 as my denominator. So I have 27 seconds and I have 16 seconds. 27 is larger than 16, which means 3/8 would be larger than 2/9. So knowing that information, when I come back up here, I know that 2/9 was less than 3/8. So I'm going to go ahead and put 2/9 right here and then 3/8 right here. So now I've put my fractions in order from least to greatest based on just looking at where they fall, whether they're more than half, less than half, and then comparing the ones that are in the same category. Let's try another one. So I'm looking here and I don't see any that are equal to a half. I don't even see really any that are that close to a half. So let's try to label them as more or less. So we know that 7/8 is going to be greater than half. 3/10 is less than a half. 3/4 is greater than half. And 1/6 is less than half. So if I'm putting these four fractions in order and I'm putting them from least to greatest, I'm going to put my two less than half ones first and my two greater than half ones second. So I've got to do two different comparing problems. So let's do 3/10 compared to 1/6 first. So I'm going to come down here, 3/10 to 1/6, and I'm cross multiplying. So I get 10, 6 times 3 is 18. And I want to make sure I have my common denominator. 10 times 6 is 60. So I have the same size pieces. So I have 18/60ths compared to 10/60ths. 18/60ths is bigger than 10/60ths, which means 3/10 is bigger than 1/2. So if I come up here, 1/6 is going to come first because that's less than 3/10. So I'm going to go ahead and give those both check marks. So my next two problems will be comparing these two fractions, 7/8 and 3/4. So I'm going to take 7/8, 3/4, and I'm going to cross multiply. That's 24, that's 28, and then they have the same size denominator because 8 times 4 is 32. So I have 28 30-seconds and 24 30-seconds. 28 is greater than 24. Since I have the same size pieces in my denominator, I can compare my numerators, and I see that 7/8, which is equivalent to 28 30-seconds, is larger than 3/4, which is equivalent to 24 30-seconds. So if 3/4 is the smaller of the two, then when I'm listing them out up here, I'm going to do 3/4 before I do 7/8. And I have now put my fractions in order from least to greatest without using any sort of long division to change them to decimals, to sort them, to put them back in order, just by using my knowledge of fractions and how they relate to a half, how they're bigger than, smaller than, close to, and then comparing them when they fall into those categories together. So I wish you all the best with ordering fractions. Thank you so much for watching and happy practicing.